Welcome back to my channel. Today we will dive a little bit deeper into why the negotiations preceding the war failed. On February 28th, the geopolitical landscape completely changed. The US and Israeli airstrikes hit multiple targets across Iran, plunging the region into another wave of violence. However, this is neither surprising nor predictable for people who have been following the events unfolding preceding this tragic date. The answer lies in a cascade of failures. It started with the collapse of a negotiation. Let's talk about what's going on inside the negotiating room and outside the negotiation room. Outside the room, the United States has adopted the policy of maximum pressure. What does that mean? It means that the United States is truly squeezing Iran using all kinds of sanctions possible, available that will hurt the Iranian economy, its government the most, trying to really put a chokehold on them. Aside from that, one most important aspect is the military positioning of the US troops, especially its carrier groups, into the region in a poise trying to intimidate but also prepare for invasion if things doesn't go right. On the other hand, there are massive protests breaking out in Iran itself, causing the domestic condition for Iran to deteriorate and hence weakening its bargaining position. Thus, it might have given the US more leverage and better positioning inside the room. So let's take a look at here. What did the US demand then inside the negotiation? It wants Iran to completely end its uranium program, limit its ballistic missiles, and stop funding and training for its proxies, such as Hezbollah and as well as Houthis. So all these, to the United States' mind, are security demands, aiming for making the region more stable, making U.S. assets more secure. However, from Iran's standpoint, these demands are existential. Its nuclear program could be seen as a way for it to retain future leverage. So giving up on that is a huge cost to them. Iran's stance that is that it will always and must retain its sovereignty and enrichment rights, thus pitting its demand in direct contrast to what the US want. So it's no surprise that these will fail. But the US is not without a way trying to get this to work. In fact, I do believe the United States did want the negotiation to work out. Thus, we can apply the concept of cost-linked signal and pay for power in this scenario. How do a nation communicate to the rivals, the opponents on the negotiation table, that we are serious about what we say, that we are serious that if the negotiation doesn't work out, we will go to war? How can the other side trust that? How can we convince that this is not a bluff? Well, we can take military action. For example, by repositioning one of our carrier fleets into the area, joining the existing one there. That is a military action that costs money, resource, manpower to conduct. So that means we mean business, and they better take us seriously. So that's one way to pay for power. The second way to pay for power, as the United States have done, is the sanctions. Sanctions certainly will hurt Iranian economy, but it also hurt the United States and its allies' economy as well. Sanctions is always a double-edged sword. It might hurt the Iranians more, but it's not without a cost to the United States. Nonetheless, it has been going on for a while, so the convincing power of sanctions may not be so severe. That is why Trump tried to ramp up the degree and the level of sanctions. Now, lastly, perhaps the cheapest way is to make public threats. Talk are cheap, but talk is a little bit more expensive in a democracy. Why? Because if a president or a leader make promises and don't keep them, the public presumably can punish them in the next round of voting. Thus, for democracies to make public threats, it carries a little bit more weight. However, there's always just a very thin layer between the costly signaling, intending for peace talks, versus the actual preparation of war. And that is why the situation can get very dangerous if the other side doesn't take the hint or refuse to take the hint that it should come to a negotiated settlement. So that leads us to how come the signaling didn't get through? Well, from the Iranian perspective, they are really in a dilemma. To back down, to give up its nuclear program, to say, oh no, we should stop now, will incur huge reputational cost. What is reputation? Well, you want to seem strong, you want to seem capable. At the same time, with these domestic protests, if they back down, the protesters may see weakness in them and see that their protest is causing real, tangible impact and continue to do so instead of stopping. And that is something the regime may not want. Similarly, its domestic supporters, whether it's the military and the government or the religious segment, may be disappointed if the leaders back down. And that will threaten them if their supporters abandon them and choose their rivals or their opponents. That's something, it's a cost to the leaders in Iran. Another reputational cost is on the international stage. While they might not care what the Europeans or the Asians or the other countries think of them, but they might have a little bit more tangible cost with the proxies that they're funding and supporting. If they back down and stop supporting them, what would Hezbollah think? What would the Houthis think? They might seek other patrons. They might have a grudge against Iranians. And that is something perhaps will become costly. Finally, I want to say that the closer Iran is closer to its breakthrough in its nuclear program, the less likely it is going to back down. The closer they are, the presumably a huge bargaining leverage will soon come to their hand. And hence they want to wait and stall for that. They want to stall as long as they can. However, if they do back down now, the sunk cost is huge, and they may not get the chance to do that. Which leads to another concept, the commitment problem and asymmetry of information, but we'll dive into that in another time. This is a typical for a weak state in its negotiation with a much stronger state. It wants to bluff, it wants to look strong because it knows if it looks weak, it will be taken advantage of. It cannot trust the stronger side. However, if they keep pretending that they're strong and keep pushing the boundary, it might push over to turn signaling into actual war. And this might be the reason why we end up in this conflict. Thank you for joining me today. Hopefully you learned something and let me know what you want to discuss next time.